Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our last multicultural cohort event of the academic year. For those of you who don't know, the cohort was established in order to celebrate the diversity of our student population. And so all the English classes in the cohort have culturally diverse curriculum and events like these that are geared towards building community. We are honored to have distinguished author Rudy Ruiz join us today to speak about his book, Seven for the Revolution. Thank you, Rudy, for coming all the way from Texas to join us here in Long Beach. But before we hear Rudy speak, there will be 5 English multicultural cohort students that are going to read some of their short works. So after the student letters, we'll hear Rudy, and then we'll have, if time permits, a short Q&A, and then we'll close, but there will be time after the event to meet the author and get your book signed. This event is called Our Stories with Rudy Ruiz because as we read the stories in his book, many of us can't help but see a part of ourselves in the lives of the characters. Today, our students have written beautiful letters to the characters from the book, and through these letters, they have shared facets of their own lives. The first student that I'd like to welcome to the podium is Miriam Abila. She'll be reading her letter to Laura from Fighting Words. So Miriam, please come on up.
Hi guys, my name's Miriam. I'm going to be reading my letter to Laura from Fighting Words. So I'm going to go ahead and start. All right. Dear Laura, first off, I would like to let you know that your story was very inspiring and I have found some relatedness with it in myself. I applaud you for never giving up on your education and proving those who doubted you wrong. In some parts of your story, it would make me have flashbacks of past events in my life. For instance, when your kindergarten teacher made that remark that you would not be able to graduate high school or even get to college due to not knowing the English language, it made me giggle a little because language doesn't define a person or an individual, nor does it determine a person's success. One of my favorite parts of your story was the way you communicated with your grandfather. It broke my heart to know a mother would prevent her child to speak her primary language with loved ones. I would be destroyed if I wouldn't be able to speak to my abuelitos in Spanish. When I read those lines, it took me back to the time when I was quite young and my mother wanted me to stop drinking milk from a bottle. My abuelita would sneak me a bottle every now and then when I was going to bed. That was one of me and my abuelito Jorge's secrets. Eventually we got caught, but I would always remember that small act of love. Unlike your mother, my mom would urge my siblings and I to speak Spanish because she wanted to make sure we could communicate with our relatives who didn't speak English. As I grew up, I kept getting better until I could finally have a full conversation with my abuelitos without saying, "Sí, abuelitos, mi day estuvo cool." I'm grateful that the language of my heritage was never stripped from me as it was for you. From reading your story, I see the great love you had for your grandparents, and that is something I can very much relate to. Besides my mother, father, and sisters, my abuelitos were my go-to people. When my mother fixed their papers for them to come to the USA, I was ecstatic because finally for once they were coming to visit me. I do not mind traveling to Mexico to visit them, but as I got older, it got harder with school and work. When they arrived, I cried like a newborn baby. Now I would get to spend endless time with them. My grandpa and I would spend hours playing Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64. That was his favorite game. And when he would lose or get way into the game, he would begin to curse in Spanish, which was the funniest thing ever. As for my grandma, we also had a favorite activity to do together, but instead of the games, I would spend time watching novelas with her. Sadly, just like you, I lost one of my abuelitos. Just in my case, it was my grandma, and that day had to be the hardest. My grandma suffered from diabetes and had suffered from a few strokes, so I knew I was My grandma suffered from diabetes and had a few strokes, so I knew I was losing one of my prized possessions when it happened. My grandma passed 3 years ago now, and until this day, I feel it's unreal. I know the deep grief you felt when you lost your grandpa, and my condolences to you. But like I was writing to you. Sorry. But like you, I will honor her memory and uphold my culture. Back to the main reason why I was writing you, was to express my appreciation to you. I enjoyed your story and found it heartwarming how you expressed yourself towards your grandparents and strive to become successful in school and going to college when time came. Thank you for your time, and I wish you nothing but the best in life. Sincerely, Miriam.
Thank you. Next, we have Philip Velasquez. He'll be reading his letter to the Colonel from the Colonel and his Bridge. Come on up, Philip.
Hello, everyone. I'm Philip, and my letter is to Enrique from the Colonel and his Bridge. Dear Enrique, I feel that you have faced the biggest challenge of all, the fight against time and the change that comes with it. You have taught me that the fear of change can lead to more pain and loss than if change was simply left to happen. Why did you not open up to the idea of your daughters marrying outside of your race? The decision you made to deny any chance of you accepting the American men into your family drove away your daughters possibly forever. I know it's scary to know change happens and we don't know what will happen, but why run from it? The beauty of life is embracing change and growing with it. You taught me to have a more open mind to change and not be stubborn about it, but to embrace it as part of life, and that's what's beautiful about it. I thank you for that.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, next we have Jonathan Domingo, and he'll be reading his letter also to Enrique from the Colonel.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Domingo. I'm reading a letter for Enrique, the Colonel and his Bridge. Dear Enrique, after reading your life history about your wife, your 2 daughters, and your war story, you really made me admire you. I relate to your story of your life. One is your relationship with your wife and your 2 daughters, who you always look after them and provide for their needs. You guide them and protect them, just like what I do with my wife and my 2 daughters, especially to my oldest one. She's 6 years old now, and she's in kindergarten. Every time she goes to school, I will make sure that she has enough food, snacks, water in her bag, even though the school provides food for them. But I still want to make sure that she's okay, and also I always let my wife know to pick her up on time. I'm very protective with my kids, just like you are. The second reason I admire you is your achievements in life. From little young boy, they became a man, and then they called you a colonel. People respected you for your achievements, and you really did work hard to fulfill your dreams, kind of like me. I do work really hard to get what I want, even though I have a stable job as a fireman. But I want to strive for more and learn more that I don't know, and become a fire captain in the future. Enrique, I'll be honest to you. While I'm reading your story, it made me mad and sad at the same time, especially when you're trying to save the Yaquis tribe and give them a better life. But what they did to you was wrong. They lied to you and killed your soldiers. And you killed the Yaqui leader trying to rape the little Yaqui kid. That one really made me mad and upset a lot, because when I was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, my fellow soldiers and I encountered a lot of enemies. We were getting shot at and saw a lot of dead people, especially women and kids. Reading your war story made me think that you were a soldier just doing your job to protect everyone else, just like I do. Enrique, one thing that I don't like or agree with you is your last paragraph in your story. I don't understand that you did work really hard for your dreams when you said that I have a bridge to blow up. Come on now, Enrique. You know better than that. You've been there, done that. I understand that you really love your two daughters, but I think it's time to move on. I know for me it's easy to say because I'm not there yet. But I will make sure that I will ready myself for that day to come. I know it is going to be hard for me, but that's how life is. You need to sacrifice sometimes. Anyway, let's go back to you. Brother, your daughters are all grown up already. They can choose now what they want for their lives and what is good for them. But sometimes you need to let go. Let them be happy and learn from their mistakes. Just like you and I, we were happy once and made mistakes, but we learn from it. You should know that, Enrique. Respectfully yours, Jonathan Domingo.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next, we have Michael Iraete. He's going to be talking to Ramon from Bending the Laws of Motion. So come on up, Mike.
Hello, I'm Michael, and I wrote a letter to Ramon. Dear Ramon, when I was younger, we were very alike. I used to be very ashamed of my dad because he was a janitor back then when I was like 7. He would drop me off to school in his beat up pickup truck, and I used to be very jealous of my classmates, whether it was the cars that their parents drove or it was simply by their jobs. Your father and mine and my parents are also similar. They really care for us and want the best. My parents put me in a better school comparing from my older sisters. They also taught us some valuable stuff too. Our father showed us how to be independent and hard workers. My dad would take me to his job so I can make some extra money for myself to buy whatever I want. And one of the best things that they ever gave me was their encouragement to do whatever I wanted to do. And your father reminded me of my father and how our relationships are. And I hope the best for you and your father. Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, now we have Alejandra Reynoso, and she'll be reading she'll be reading her letter to Elia from This Is My Wall Now.
Hi, my name is Alejandra, and I wrote to Elia from It's My Wall Now. Dear Elia, it is disappointing to know that you were treated with great injustice. After all, we are only trying to pursue the American dream, and this land was granted by our Spanish ancestors. The United States has taken over your human rights. I can only imagine how frustrating this was for you after your son fought for this country. It is unbelievable to know you were treated with unfairness and that you had to prove your citizenship to get past your own backyard. Know that I feel extremely sorry for what they have done to you, your guardian especially. I know how much it meant to you and what it represented, the memory of your son. Know that I support you completely. I support how you have tried to stand up for yourself and defend your rights. Even though everyone says you should remain silent, you should be treated with fairness. You are a citizen of the United States. I believe you have the right to decide what happens to your property. Therefore, you should fight and let everyone know how unfair you're being treated. Why can't the wall be built somewhere else? Why can't the wall be set up differently? Since not much can be done, always remember the true meaning of your garden. Always keep in mind the huge significance it has for you. The memory of your son will always be with you, and that, his memory, the fact that he will always be your son, no one can take that from you. Sincerely, Alejandra Reynoso.
Thank you again to these students who share their work with us. Your letters were touching and insightful. Rudy Ruiz is the author of Seven for the Revolution and Adelante, and he is co-author of Going Hungry. Rudy grew up in Texas along the U.S.-Mexico border in Brownsville and even spent some time living in Matamoros, Mexico. He attended Harvard University for his BA and attended Harvard again to get his master's degree. And there's something else I'd like to share with you about Rudy. In addition to speaking with us today, he also spoke to our cohort from last semester. And instead of taking his speaker's fee, he has chosen to donate the speaker's fee from last semester and this semester to our multicultural cohort students so that our cohort students have the opportunity to apply for scholarships. So we're going to have many scholarships available to past and present multicultural cohort students because of his generous donation. So for all the students who are here, can we please give Rudy a round of applause for his generosity? Thank you. The book 7 for the Revolution contains 7 stories that begin around the late 1800s and ends in a post-apocalyptic future. Each story portrays an aspect of life that Latinos living in the United States experience. His book is relatable, moving, thought-provoking, and a pleasure to read. 7 for the Revolution won awards in Best Popular Fiction, Most Inspirational Fiction, and Best First Book Fiction in the 2014 International Latino Book Awards. As I said, we are honored to have such a distinguished guest here today, so please join me in welcoming author Rudy Ruiz.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for having me here and for coming and devoting some time this afternoon to sharing not only these stories, but your stories and our stories collectively. Also, I want to say a special thanks to Berlin and to the college for inviting me back. It was a really great experience being here last semester, and so very happy to be back here with you. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my story, my background, kind of where I came from and how I got into writing, and talk about kind of what writing has meant to me. It's something that has been a big part of my life in different ways throughout, since I was a child, really. And also share a little bit from the book, and then kind of have a little bit of opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. But before I do that, I did want to acknowledge and thank the students for your letters. I heard that you all, wrote letters for class, and then some were selected, and it's an honor when I heard about that as an author to hear that. It really is special, because to me, all the characters, when you write a book, they're almost like they're real people, and at first you're the only one who knows them, and then when other people read them, they get to know them, and maybe they get inspired, or they feel certain things, or it makes them think. But it kind of makes those fictitious characters that the writer makes up in their mind, it kind of makes them somewhat real, more real in a way. So to hear the letters is very, very touching, very moving. And I wanted to say a few things about, kind of what I think that maybe the people you wrote the letters to would say back, or kind of what they might think about what you said about them. With Miriam's letter to Laura from Fighting Words, she mentioned that various aspects that touched her, and I think that what Laura, and her family would reflect back is that I think over generations, each generation has the best intentions for the next generation, but when you're in the thick of it and you're raising children, you're trying to do your best, and 20 years later, when they're grown-ups and you look back, you might realize that you made some mistakes along the way, or that society has changed in a way that what you did back then now is not necessary, or not the best way, that you should do things. So there was a time, what inspired that story was, there was a time in America where there was such a push for Latinos to assimilate and become as kind of mainstream or anglicized as possible, so that there were, generations of parents that were asking their kids to not speak Spanish at all, or to kind of almost deny their roots or their heritage. And they thought they were doing the right thing. And we're lucky that the idea of multiculturalism, has evolved in the United States to where now we mostly, respect and believe that people's cultures have a part to play, not only in their lives, but in the lives of everyone else, so that we can kind of enjoy and celebrate the diversity of the cultures, and yet we can all still be American at the same time. And that's an evolution, really, of thinking about immigration and about what used to be called assimilation, and now, a lot of people call it acculturation. So I think that the idea that you can earn an education and learn new languages, and it doesn't have to mean losing your heritage, it doesn't have to mean not being able to communicate with your grandparents or with your elders, is a very important, thing. And so I think that that's kind of what they would reflect back to her. In thinking about what Philip said to the colonel, it was also very moving, and I think what it reminded me of was that sometimes what the colonel may have learned in that process was like that sometimes we lose sight of where life wants to take us because we're so obsessed with our own plans, and we sometimes miss opportunities if we are overly stubborn or overly obstinate or focused, on our grand schemes and our grand dreams to control life and our family members and everything. So I imagine if he had it to do all over again, he would have said, hey, I'm losing sight of what matters here. What matters here is my family. And he was really, kind of out of touch with his family, and he lost his family in the process. And in the end, his frustration, leads to that kind of final paragraph that Jonathan talked about. And he talked about, and first of all, thank you, Jonathan, for your service to the country. And it was surprising, to hear that perspective of someone who has served the country and gone to war here today, relating to this character that is really loosely based on my great-grandfather in Mexico many years ago, someone who I never met, but I heard the stories from my grandmother, from my abuelita. So it's amazing that even across probably over 100 years or, all these generations that people can connect to stories and experiences from that far back. And, I think that that idea of his experience that I think Jonathan touched on a little bit was, he talked about how important his family was, and then he talked about working hard, the hard work of trying to get ahead. The sacrifice that goes into that hard work is often the family, and it's like this really difficult balance that I think most of us face nowadays is we're trying to do better and do our work, and then we're trying to make sure we don't neglect our family and vice versa, so it's this balancing act. And Enrique, in his experience, because the war would send him to all these different places, for long periods of time, he really lost touch with his family. That was part of his sacrifice. And yeah, blowing up things is never the right answer, but at the end of the story, it's just kind of a continuation of Enrique's just bad decisions, and his misguided thinking. He was very noble and very honorable, but he was very stuck in his ways. He wasn't flexible enough. Finally, the last two letters, also very, very touching. The letter to Ramon from Mike, I think it just reminds me of one of the things I'm the most grateful of to my dad that I think Ramon would say, because Ramon is based kind of loosely on me as a kid. One of the things I'm very grateful to my dad for is that he taught me that there's honor in all kinds of work as long as it's honest work, and that we should never be ashamed of our work as long as it's honest, And he used to always say this dicho in Spanish, which I may be saying wrong or I may not, but I recall it as el que de sudor su frente se moja, ante nadie se sonroja, and that this meant that those whose brows were covered in sweat, their foreheads were covered in sweat from hard work in the outside or in the fields or whatever that work was, that was such manual labor, that they had not to like blush or be ashamed before anyone, because they should take pride. We should all take pride in their work too. And I thought that Mike's reaction really captured that you learned that too, and that's what Ramon learned from his dad, that the allure of the easy way, of the easy path to make the riches and reach the American dream, isn't always necessarily the right way to go forward, as he saw in the story. And finally, Alejandra's letter to Elia, Alejandra said that they couldn't take away Elia's memory of her son, and I think that she also hit on that they couldn't take away her heritage and the fact that this was something that so belonged to her, yet it was such an insult to her that it was being trampled upon, if you will. And I think that the whole point, what Elia would say, if she were still alive, was that they ultimately, what she also realized they couldn't take away from her was her voice. And she really wanted to express herself, and she wanted to make her statement that, that as an American citizen, she had the right to express her opinion. She didn't agree with what was happening, and she had an opportunity through that forum and through just freedom of speech, to speak up and to make her opinion known. And so that's, I think, another important part of, what her story was about. And really that's a good segue to like what writing has meant to me, because to give you a little background on me, I was born in Brownsville, Texas, which is on the southernmost tip of Texas on the border with Mexico. And my family was from the other side of the border, My mom was a Mexican citizen until I was in college. And I was very lucky to live in this very bicultural, bilingual world of the border, because I was able to really experience, thanks to my parents and my grandparents and my whole extended family of tias and tios, really the best of both worlds at the time. At the time, it was really easy to go back and forth across the border, not like it is now. Back then, in about 10, 15 minutes, we could drive from our house in Texas to my grandmother's house in Matamoros, and we'd be there at the dinner table, and then we'd be with my, grandparents, and then drive back home at night. So it was a very different way of life, and it was pretty safe back then. Now it's very different. But because of that way of life, I was able to hear a lot of stories around that dinner table from my abuelitos, from my tios, from my tias, from my own parents. And a lot of those stories were early on what started inspiring me, to think about writing. Also, my mom really loved books, and so she got me into reading at an early age. And that combination, I think, of hearing these amazing stories from like my abuelita, who would tell me these stories like about the Mexican Revolution and about everything since then, because she'd been born in the year 1900, and she lived to be 101 years old. So I was super lucky to get to hear all these great stories. And then my father, that character of Ramon's father is kind of loosely based on my father. And my father was just a very hardworking, person. He also had amazing stories. Whereas my grandmother had the stories about Mexico, my father had the stories about basically being the first generation born in the United States. And he had stories about, trying to get his way to college, be the first in his family that went to college in Texas in the 1950s. And how hard it was back then, and the discrimination that existed, and just kind of the odds that they had to struggle against to try to be in school and to stay in school and to graduate, the determination that they had. So those stories like inspired me, and then the love of books that my mom, gave me just kind of got me thinking. I wanted to somehow capture these stories in life, in part to like kind of preserve, I guess, what I felt about my culture, and then also, in part as I kind of grew older and started realizing that you know, in America, we have this broken immigration system and this broken way of looking at immigrants and what they can become and what they can do in our country. I was inspired to write this book because I thought, you know, maybe by sharing these stories and also thinking about what the future could be like if America doesn't change, maybe it could inspire some people to change their view about Latinos, about immigrants, about the role that immigrants can play in America, about all the value that we can bring to this country, you know. So in that sense, writing, I think for me became, you know, a way of preserving heritage, a way of telling stories, and a way of hopefully trying to add to positive change in the world, you know, add a little bit of my voice in trying to bring positive change to the world. And there's a writer who, I love this quote from this writer who kind of like inspires me. He's an African-American writer named James Baldwin, and just a wonderful, you know, very famous voice within multicultural literature. And he said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so that's the way I kind of look at my writing, is trying to face some of these challenges, face some of these problems, and kind of help influence and inspire maybe some positive change, you know, in some way in the world. So with that, I'm going to ask Berlin, up until what time do we have for me to speak, because I want to make sure I don't. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, good. All right, excellent. So I just didn't want to, sometimes, you know, I get talking and can forget it. So I wanted to share a little bit about the writing process, because how many of you guys here have tried writing aside from the letters and are interested in writing and literature? Okay, well, we have a few hands out there. You know, writing, it's funny because people think that writing is, you know, sometimes they think that not everybody can do it, but the reality is, like, writing can help pretty much almost everybody in some way or another in their life. Like, for some people, it might be their career. For some people, it might be just artistic expression, like to express themselves, to get it out, you know, journal or have a diary or whatever. And for everyone else, I mean, really just to communicate effectively in work and, you know, with family, with colleagues. So writing is I think a fundamental skill. And you know, I think as far as writing and my writing process, you know, it always starts with inspiration, but I think that often people, you know, have this vision of, oh, I got to go somewhere and sit on a mountain, you know, and like get inspired. It's really not like that. You know, you can find inspiration everywhere. It's all around you, really. And I always have found that for me, like, I used to try to, when I was first kind of exploring writing, you know, I would try to write about very kind of fantastical things or science fiction or, you know, just things that I didn't really know much about. And then I started realizing, hey, you know, people seem to like my writing more when I'm writing about things that I know something about, you know, things that are rooted in where I grew up or my family or, you know, my work or the people that you know, are around me, typically, the culture. So really, it's a very fundamental advice, but when it comes to writing, it's great to write about what you know and things that you're passionate about. And the material is everywhere. It's in the stories that you hear from your family members. It's in little things you might pick up on the news or, you know, online or whatever, and you might read something interesting or hear something interesting, and you might basically ask yourself, well, what if this happened, like, to that person or to someone I know, you know? And you start kind of hypothesizing about it, and you suddenly just start writing down your ideas. The other aspect about writing that I think is a very, it's pretty straightforward, but, you know, I think it's interesting to share because, like, maybe next time you're reading or working on writing something, like, you can have this in mind. I found it very helpful, and it's that most stories consist of like 3 key elements, and the 3 elements are the environment that the story takes place in, the plot, like what is it that's happening, and character. And then basically, it's like you're putting a character, you're putting a person in this environment, they're faced with this kind of plot, this situation, and what's that character going to do, and what is that action going to reveal, about their themselves. And are they going to learn anything? Are they going to change? Are they going to stay the same? Are they going to blow up a bridge? That kind of thing. So I thought that what I would do was kind of read short little snippets from some of the stories that I think kind of exemplify that idea of environment, plot, and character. And the first one that I'll share with you